Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elaine O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's okay. I've been watching this deer.
Yeah, you guys kind of have a pet, sort of.
We do sort of have a pet deer. I'm not sure how we... No, I do know how we got the pet deer. The mom ran away.
The mom ran away?
And he's just been an orphan, taken care of by the ducks and the chickens.
Aww.
And us, apparently.
Yeah.
So we've been watching the deer. It's one of the things that is common between where we live in Tennessee right now and where we lived in California.
Yeah?
Deer.
Really?
The presence of deer, yes.
Oh.
Yes. Deer in California are considered a pest. Rather than either food or entertainment.
Okay.
Because they eat people's gardens.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, he's cute.
He's very cute. He's much cuter than the chickens. It's mating season for the chickens. I don't know if you've noticed this.
I've suspected.
The tops of the hens are not looking healthy these days.
Yeah.
Because the roosters climb up and hang on by holding on to feathers.
Oh,
and of course, that only lasts till the feather comes out.
Right.
So.
Ouch.
Yeah. Ouch. So the deer is much more entertaining. So what are we talking about today, my friend?
In the news, there was a very tragic fire at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And the emotions that it has stirred, just globally, really, for Catholics, non-Catholics, people of all different faiths, people of no faith, it's been really interesting to read about and to watch. And it got me thinking about sacred places. What is it that draws us to certain places? Why is it that we find God or the divine in certain places more so than others? There's a hill that overlooks Nashville, a notorious makeout spot. But that has nothing to do with why I find it.
We're not going to hear that story?
No.
Okay.
You can climb up to the top of the hill, like you can drive up most of the way and then you have to climb up the rest. But it is the most sweeping view of the city that you can see from standing on Earth. During a time when I was doing a lot of just sort of self-evaluating and trying to figure out where I fit, that hill became some place where I could connect with God in a unique way. Because I could look at Nashville, I could look on the city with a view that was kind of above and outside. And it kind of helped me gain some perspective about where I fit in all of that. So I may be the only person that finds Love Circle as a sacred place, but I do. I took my kids there recently. They had never been there before, and we went at dusk, so the lights were starting to come on. And it was kind of like, Griffith Observatory in LA, and going there at dusk is just amazing because you just see parts of the city just start to light up. Well, the view at Love Circle is kind of like that for Nashville. You're not quite as high up above, but you definitely get the whole panorama of it. And I think sometimes, perspective is something that I gained there, and that maybe these sacred places offer us, is a sense of connection and perspective that maybe we just don't get somewhere else.
Didn't you write or start to write or finish a Grace and Gravity song up there?
Yeah. Sitting on the Edge of Your World.
Okay, that's what I thought. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Benton's music, A, you should be, and B, Grace and Gravity was a compilation of songs really written about the connection to God in a time of your life where you were reassessing, reevaluating, things were changing, and trying to make sense out of all of that.
Yeah.
And so Sitting at the Edge of Your World was written up there. And I remember you were talking about that when you did a house concert in Redwood City.
Oh, right. I remember that. Yeah.
And so I remember that part. And which reminds me, house concerts, call us. So the other thing that you said that struck me was that language of perspective. Mm-hmm. Because it's not only physical perspective, you can see things laid out in front of you and you're not hemmed in by them.
Right.
You're standing away from them and being able to see them, which is that actual physical experience, but it's an emotional experience as well.
It is. Yeah.
I'm sitting on the edge of the world. I'm watching you, waiting to get in your name. There's nothing to say, you don't have to explain the heart that I've already heard. I'm sitting on the edge.
as you were speaking, I was wondering whether places that are sacred have either that ability to gain perspective or that ability to be very surrounded. Like, I wonder if there's an extremity of experience that goes with those.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about, without getting into the architecture and everything of Notre Dame, which is one of the reasons it, I think, affected a lot of people, but there's that sense in Notre Dame, if you experience it as sacred, there's something about being hemmed in. There's something about that enclosedness of Notre Dame that I think is powerful for folks.
Yeah.
You know, I had a really, really, really strong reaction to the fire. I was trying to figure out why.
Yeah.
Part of it is because I've been there. Part of it is because I've gone to worship services there and all of that kind of thing. I think there's something about a place like that that feels like some aspect of my history and our collective history is going away.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think in terms of being connected to people very much in that sense. Like, you know, I don't have any family to speak of, and I don't have that sense of, your grandpa was born over,
Right.
you know. But I really felt that sense that there was a connected loss. And it was even before people started talking about it, it felt like something binding was going down. I would say that for me, Notre Dame is a sacred place, although I wouldn't have thought of it that way until the fire.
Right.
So the language of sacredness is interesting to me. And the way you just used it was in terms of where we are able to connect to God, or can you expand on that language a little bit? Like, how broadly do you want to make sacred in this?
Sacredness is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. I wrote a song called Sacred recently, and I was just thinking about how there's sacredness all around us if we're looking for it. I think most of us spend most of our lives not looking for it. So when we discover it, or when it is thrust upon us, we're taken back by it. I think that there is sacredness in everything that's living, because I believe that everything that's living finds its life in the divine. There are some things that are innately sacred. Human life, I think, is one of those things that's innately sacred. There are other things that we make sacred by the pedestal that we put them on, or the reverence that we bestow to them, or the love that we put into creating them. Or like the cathedral, I think, is a really good example. I'm sure that the architects and the designers and the craftsmen and the builders and the church saw Notre Dame as sacred when they built it. But this is almost 900 years later. And now I think part of its sacredness is how it's weathered so much. It has earned a spot among just the most persevering places.
I like that language.
It's persevered through wars and schisms in the church, and it's persevered through so much. And so when we see something that's that symbol of perseverance, damaged, hindered, something's like chipping away at it, it can move us one of two ways. I think it can either cause us to doubt the sacredness of everything or anything, or it can help us to see and cling to the things that we find sacred even closer, because we realize that maybe they're not always going to be with us.
Sure.
So sacred, I don't know what the literal definition is of sacred. If we took out the Webster's, what it would say. But I think for me, sacred has always kind of meant set apart or special, touched by God in some way. For me, places where I encounter God feel like sacred places. And I encounter God everywhere, but there are some places that I go to when I need to encounter God.
Right.
And those for me are sacred places.
Right. And Notre Dame is not one of those. You don't go to Notre Dame in order to encounter God.
Right.
There's the sacred to me because it is one of those places where I encounter God.
Right.
Right. And then there's sacred places. They have become sacred. I'm thinking more about geography rather than built places.
Yeah.
So there are places that are sacred because many people over time have either encountered God or attributed God to that place.
Right.
Right? They're the places that in the Celtic tradition are called thin places,
Right.
where one can expect to encounter God, where the veil between the eternal and the material is particularly thin and permeable. There are the places that are sacred to us because something happened there,
Yeah.
right? There are also places that are sacred that don't seem necessarily to have anything to do with God, but they matter.
Yeah.
And maybe they matter because they're part of the collective history. Maybe they matter because, and again, thinking about Notre Dame, because they are architecturally or designedly or whatever significant, particularly in terms of place. It has a very wide range.
It does. It really, really does.
When I first met my husband, he's from the South, and we met in Berkeley. And the first real conversation we had, I said, "You must really miss the South." And he was completely taken aback by that, because people in the North and the West tend to think that Southerners are really glad to get out of the South.
Yeah.
We have a particular arrogance of our own. But it was clear as he talked about it that the South had a sacredness, even though he had no desire to be there at that moment. There was something that was deep and resonant about it. It wasn't like he would necessarily, at that point, come here in order to seek God. But something was deep, something was resonant. And I think that that's another sense of sacred that for those of us who are more peripatetic, we don't have that, this is a rootedness. And I think that what you were pointing to about Notre Dame, the persistence, it's interesting that you anthropomorphized Notre Dame when you said it, but that persistence has something to do with that rootedness.
It does.
Notre Dame has been destroyed and rebuilt and redone and burned and blown apart and all, just all those things throughout the centuries. The spire that went down is only a couple hundred years old.
Right.
And yet it feels like this almost ancient connector.
Yeah.
Right? That's really, really interesting.
Like him or not, agree with him or not, when Billy Graham passed away, I think a lot of people felt, we just knew that when he was gone, there wasn't anybody else.
Okay. So part of sacredness is irreplaceable.
Yeah. And I think when something strong and persevering becomes frail, and you know that the end is coming for that thing or that person or whatever that is, it just makes me more aware of how precious these things and these places are, because they can be lost.
I would never presume to speak for the native peoples of this land. And my understanding is that as Europeans and others took over great swaths of the land, there was that encroachment on something sacred.
Absolutely.
I think, at least when I've heard non-native folks get this kind of dreamy, almost worship of native folks rather than worship of what they worship. It's because of the idea that everything was sacred to them.
Yeah.
And we miss that idea that everything is sacred. We miss that idea that a place or a way of life or something could be imbued with God.
Right.
And I think we have a longing for that, a
do too.
deep desire that we then attach to other things. I mean, in our tradition, that language of idolatry and sin has to do with looking for the sacred in things that are not God.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to go all the way to an idea that it's affronting to God. I think we are made to experience the God in things.
Yes.
And in places and in people.
Yes.
The material has such a power of its own that we can lose the deeper, more ephemeral aspects, right? So there is something about that. Everything, nature speaks to the glory of God. The first testimony to God is nature.
Yeah.
And when we see something that's been created over the years that is designed to be beautiful, designed to glorify its maker, there's something about that. I don't think you used this word, but that noticing I wonder if noticing isn't half of sacredness, the experience of sacredness. When one is leaving a place, everything suddenly becomes sacred, even if you didn't care about it at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
The little place down the street where you would get burritos on the afternoon because you didn't have time. You know, Taco Bell becomes sacred, right?
Right.
Because you're leaving that Taco Bell.
Yeah.
It's the noticing and the potential for loss.
Yeah.
I think also there's a wistfulness and a longing that goes along with sacredness, even if the thing that you hold sacred is right in front of you.
You're right.
Like a novel shorter chapter.
I've heard you talk about Joshua Tree. Mm-hmm. Is that a place that you would say you find sacred or have found sacred?
I have found sacred. I've been wondering whether I would still find it sacred. But yeah, for many years. So Joshua Tree is part of the California desert. The California desert actually has a lot of living things in it. It's not that Saharan picture of dry. It's got lots of plants and lots of insects and lots of lizards and everything. So every year at springtime, it blooms.
Yeah.
This desert blooms.
Wow.
And so what you've got, you know, during the year is huge rock formations and trees that don't look like they should survive. And dirt, and unless you look really closely, you don't see the living things. And then it blooms. And it's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And so when I was away from church and away from people who were looking for God in that particular way, the bloom felt like Easter to me.
Yeah. Okay.
So whether it came in February or it came in May, it felt like Easter. So I would go and spend my Easters there to be reminded of that resurrection, to be reminded of that, and not even reminded in the head, but to be reminded in the gut
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. That's good.
So it was very sacred. And again, it would be interesting to know whether it still is. I'll have to go back and see. There's something about seeing a place that matters to you through somebody else's eyes. Somebody who you treasure, seeing them see what you find important through their eyes. It can be really nerve-wracking, right?
Sure.
Because you want them to see what you see,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You want to be able to say, see why this matters so much?
Right.
And when they do, it's like, yes, you know, and it reinforces the sacredness. It reifies the idea that that is in fact a thin place, that is in fact a sacred place. And it can be just excruciating when they don't,
Yeah.
right? You've talked about when your kids came to know roller coasters and just what a big deal that was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think that there's something else about that. So one of the things I've thought about is, okay, what would happen if I took you or my daughter or somebody to Joshua Tree? How would I see it then? How would I see it through somebody else's eyes, you know, and watch their experience of it? And if a place is not destroyed and we are experiencing it as sacred on a regular basis, part of it is, I think, that sense that either it's ours alone or others see it as sacred.
Sure.
You know, that really matters.
Yeah.
Right? So can we go back to the human people thing?
Yeah.
Human people as
The human
opposed to all
people.
those other people or all those other humans, the non-people humans. You said that you believe that all human life, did you say life? I don't
Life.
remember. Life is sacred. That's a problematic thing, isn't it?
Well,
I don't mean bad.
and well, it is problematic, or it can be. I have been present when a person was born, and I have been present when a person died. And those were incredibly sacred moments.
Okay.
I tend to think that every living thing that comes into being, that everything that is born into this world, is created by God and is loved and cherished by God. You know, it's like some Christians get hung up on the idea that, you know, somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer could go to heaven if he made a confession of faith right before he died, right? Those deathbed confessions. And that's not fair. That's not right. He shouldn't get to go to heaven. He did all those terrible things. Yeah, okay, so he did all those terrible things. But God doesn't think the way we do. And God doesn't see us the way we see each other. I'm not saying that I see everybody as sacred all the time, because Lord knows I don't.
Literally.
Literally. But I think God does. And I think we should strive to. I think we should value the dignity of everybody. We should respect each other better and be kind to one another better. And I think if we recognized that, all of us are created in God's image and all of us are loved by God, I don't know, maybe we would treat each other differently. Mm-hmm. When I think about it that way, you really can find sacredness everywhere.
Yes.
You can find sacredness in a conversation with a stranger.
Yes.
You can just find it in the strangest and most unexpected places.
Everybody's wounded, bruised and scarred with stories, scratched in our hearts, imperfect. We aim for the mark, but we're so much more than we think we are.
My Buddhist teacher did not kill spiders because that spider could be your grandmother.
Right.
Which is a different way of thinking about it, right? If there is reincarnation, and it could be in any living thing, mm-hmm. that changes your perspective on all those living things.
It does.
Right? We can get too much in our heads about that and not be able to move.
Right.
The ability to look at the created world, the organic world, and see that it might be the work of God's hands, that sense that, we were talking the other day about ceramic bowls, right? Mm-hmm. That if I make something and I put my heart into it and I spend time on it and I'm happy with it, it becomes sacred for me in a particular way. Yeah. And of course, from our perspective, I'll speak for myself, from my perspective, that's God's relationship with everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so God sees all of it as a treasure and something to be taken care of and cherished.
Yeah.
That notion of the wrath of God when something goes wrong, I think, is a really wrong way to think about it. It's more the grief of God, the sorrow of God.
Yeah.
And I might get angry if something I made is broken, but it's more about grief than it is about anger.
Yeah.
It may show in anger, but it's about grief. It's about the loss of something.
Right.
We may not notice, Taco Bell, we may not notice when something is sacred until it's gone.
Yeah.
And then we think, dang.
Yeah.
It's like losing something that matters to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You suddenly realize how important it was.
Definitely.
So back to the place thing. So you started out with the power of place. How do we practice for ourselves? How do we, even if it's just one place, how do we make sure that we have a place that feels sacred and safe and thin and close to God? How do we make sure we're not just racing through our lives and missing it?
Well, there's got to be some intentionality about it. I mean, yes, I think we stumble on sacredness sometimes, mm-hmm. right? It catches us by surprise. But I think what you're talking about is sort of about intention and making sure that you're setting aside not just the place, but the time and the energy mm-hmm. to experience God or experience the divine or experience oneness. And that takes effort, and sometimes it takes discipline even to do that. One of the things that you do is you go on silent retreats because you experience God in those silent retreats. But that takes intentionality. You have to plan. You have to make arrangements for Elizabeth and for Bran, and you have to make sure that everything is taken care of while you're gone. And that takes a great deal of effort. But you anticipate what that's going to bring you mm-hmm. and what you're going to experience when you're there. And I think all of us, whether it's, if we have a favorite place outside that we like to go to pray, making the effort to go there. If that means getting in the car and driving a half an hour and then walking a half an hour to get to that one place, then mm-hmm. then you do that. Mm-hmm. So I think it comes down to making sure that we're touching the divine, and if that's connected to a place. And I think clearly we all can experience God anywhere and everywhere, and I do. But I just think when I'm in the midst of making a big decision, or when I'm in the midst of a change in seasons, either like literal seasons, sometimes fall can be a very kind of emotional time for me because I don't like the dying off part. I much prefer spring and summer. But making the effort to go to a place where you know that you can pray, where you know that you won't be disturbed, where you know that God is listening and the distractions are away, that can make a huge difference, because we can't count on the sacred to find us all the time. Sometimes we have to make the effort to do that.
We have to be able to be attentive.
Yeah.
I know for a fact, I feel very confident in saying this, that if there are places that we find sacred and we go visit one and that day it doesn't feel sacred, we can't dump it.
No.
Because we are the determining factor of whether a place feels sacred, not the place.
Not the place.
Not anyone else.
Right.
Many of us are predisposed to let go of something the minute it's not working for us anymore. And again, going back to Notre Dame, that persistence of Notre Dame, that sense that people have gone over and over and over and it felt sacred, matters.
Yeah.
Right? And the flip side of that is being able to say goodbye to sacred things and goodbye to sacred places, whether we want to or not. But there is something in choosing to say goodbye to it. Or even if you're not really choosing to say goodbye, but taking the time to say goodbye, to grieve, treasure, to all those things, that the saying goodbye can sometimes be the thing that makes it sacred forever for us.
Yeah, I see that.
Whether we like saying goodbye or not, doing that elevates something that matters and keeps it in our hearts in a particular way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So when the roof of Notre Dame was burning, people were saying goodbye. And suddenly it was imbued with a sense of sacredness that they didn't even know they had for it.
Right.
We can't be afraid to say goodbye to things. We can't be afraid to grieve them for fear we will lose the sacred. We won't lose the sacred. I think in a lot of ways we gain the sacred in a whole different way when we choose to find other sacred places, other sacred times.
I know the cracks along this sidewalk. I know this neighborhood. I see the beauty in the ugly, the glory in the good.
Going back to Joshua Tree, if I go back to Joshua Tree multiple times and I see it wistfully and thankfully, but don't experience it as being sacred, in some ways that kind of makes it more sacred, because it meant that there was a period of time in my life when the end of a season can elevate it.
Oh, sure.
Now, I confess that as we're having this conversation, I am going to Monty Python's The Meaning of Life and the song Every Sperm is Sacred. And it's now going through my head, unfortunately, and carrying on. And
oh, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, because I needed Every Sperm is Sacred in my head today. Thank you. That's going to make the rest of what I need to do today really easy.
Awesome.
Yeah. Does that kind of get at what you wanted to talk about, my friend?
Yeah, I think it does.
I love that you wrote a song in a sacred place. I'm going to listen to that differently every time it comes up.
Good. I hope so. Yeah.
Because it's part of treasuring you, treasuring it. It's that looking through somebody's eyes thing.
Looking through somebody's eyes. Yeah.
Which I like to do anyway.
I like that.
It is one of my favorite things. What else is going on that our listeners might be interested in knowing?
It's Holy Week, so we've been doing things. We did Stations of the Cross for Palm Sunday, and we're hosting a meal tonight on Maundy Thursday. And then we're going to have a big potluck feast on Easter night where people can bring their favorite dish and we'll party and celebrate the resurrection.
But tomorrow we're going to mourn the crucifixion.
And tomorrow
in
we're
the
going
evening.
to mourn the crucifixion.
Holy Week is a sacred place.
Holy Week is a sacred place, right? So we have the Nashville Cocktail Festival coming up. We have Wild Goose coming up in July. That's going to be great fun. I'm making new music, which is fun.
We love that.
Yeah.
That makes us very happy. And we would love to come to you.
We would.
We love to lead worship. We love to preach. We love to teach. We love to eat. We love to talk. We love to mix cocktails. There are many things we love to do, and we would love to do them with you. Oh, June 9th,
Yes, we have a live.
we're doing Cocktail Theology Live. So if you are hearing this before June 9th, you can go onto our website, which is schoolforseekers.com, and get tickets for Cocktail Theology Live,
Yeah.
which is just a blast.
It is a blast. It was so much fun the last time we did it.
Yep. So that will be happening. Yeah. And who knows? And who knows what God will have in store?
Who knows?
I try not to predict too much.
Yeah.
I
me
get
either.
it's too terrifying.
Yeah. Right.
Well, thank you for bringing up sacredness. I love sacredness.
I do too.
And when will the song be available to the general public, do you think?
That's a really fun question. It's done. I mean, it's recorded. I've just been debating on how and when I want to put it out.
Summertime affair statement.
Oh, yeah. Definitely summer.
Okay. So watch for the new song coming out in summer. It's called Sacred, which should be easy enough to remember today.
It should be.
We will let you know again on our website and on Benton's website when that's coming out.
Yep.
We have great t-shirts and such
We do.
having to do with sacredness.
We do.
So yeah, our website's just going to get a lot more interesting in the next minute and a half or so. So probably it's already more interesting by the time you hear this.
Probably.
So go take a look, schoolforseekers.com. And if you like what we do, please recommend it to others. And we want to know what you want us to talk about or not to talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
anything that is useful. We do this partly because we love doing it, but partly because we love you. So
Yes.
help us know.
Yep.
That it?
That's it.
Okay, let's go look at the deer again. Bye.
All right. Bye.